Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all once again to the webinar series of Burjeel Georgit Financial Services. Today we are assembling for another special moment, which is to give us an insight on the ongoing new fund offer NFO of Sundaram Mutual Fund, which is called the Sundaram Blue Chip Fund. You are aware that we have been doing these investor-related sessions for the last 3-4 months, and we have been getting a good response from investors in these sessions. I also take this opportunity to welcome our joint venture partner clients from Muscat as well to this session today. We are also running this session on Facebook Live, and I welcome participants who are on the Facebook as well today. I think I have been talking to you about the markets and how it has been moving around for the last 3 to 6 months in terms of the volatility that we have seen from March onwards. And I do not want to repeat myself in terms of where the markets have been going and how they have been doing, only to say that we have been in a very volatile situation in the market in the recent past. And there is an anticipation that the markets are likely to correct in a small manner before we start some sort of an uptick coming from the first quarter of 2021. In the meanwhile, a sequence of events that has been happening from April onwards only gives us the sort of comfort that things are looking much better compared to what was anticipated, so I say sometime in April and May. And we are also seeing the investors have also realized that it is an opportunity to come and stay invested in this market at this juncture. And it is in this background that we are doing this seminar and marketing this NFO with the view that being a large cap or a blue chip sort of an exposure, we anticipate that there is a good possibility of the fund managers getting some good quality stock into their portfolio in the next few months, taking advantage of the correction that may happen and also deliver much better returns than from this level onwards. In order to do this, we are extremely privileged to have amongst our Mr. Sunil Subramaniam, who is the Managing Director of Sundaram Mutual Fund. And I take this opportunity to welcome you, sir, to kindly have consented to address the seminar today to our investors. And also I thank the team of Sundaram based in Dubai, Karthik and Mr. Ramesh, who have coordinated for this event. Before I introduce Mr. Sunil and ask him to talk to us, I would just like to mention to you that I would request all of you to please use the Q&A box to put in your questions. After the session is over, we will have some time to pick up and choose a few questions that investors may have, which I'm sure that Mr. Sunil will be able to answer to our expectations and satisfy the terms in terms of what markets are and what we need to look into this fund in particular. Mr. Sunil has been with the Sundaram Mutual Fund for the last 15 years. After handling various roles within the Sundaram Mutual Fund, he is now the CEO of the fund, and he's also on the board of the Sundaram Asset Management Singapore Private Limited. He has got more than 3 decades of work experience in financial services across MNCs, public and private sector companies. He has worked with State Bank of India, American Express Bank, and Bank of America. He is a master's in business administration and MSc graduate from IIT Madras and also a certified associate of the Institute of Bankers. He has been instrumental, I would say that, want to repeat that Mr. Sunil has been instrumental in expanding Sundaram Mutual Fund's footprint, both in terms of its brand equity and in domestic and internationally during the 14-15 years that he has been with the fund house. And the fund has grown manifold growth during his tenure. He has also been recognized by way of many awards and recognitions. Some of them include the Economic Times Most Promising Business Leaders of Asia in 2018-19, brand recognition in terms of the Economic Times Best Brands Award in 2019, Economic Times Best Brand BFSI for 2 years in 2018 and 19. He has also a great following on YouTube, which I am seeing that he has reached. He has got a Studio Silver Award from Google for reaching over 100,000 subscribers and sharing original content on YouTube. And Mr. Sunil Subramaniam is not an alien face to us. We almost see him at least 2 or 3 days a week on ET Now and other news channels. And I've always appreciated his strong conviction and views he exhibits in spite of many contrary views that come in those channels. And many a time I would say, Mr. Sunil, that you have always been proved right to a great extent. Whatever you say may not be relevant at that point, but in the next near term, it is all becoming relatively true, or the path is clear in that direction. And we're extremely privileged to have you amongst Mr. And I would request you to kindly take over and talk to our valuable clients and give your insights on the markets, and also in terms of how this fund, investing in these funds, can generate alpha for the investors. Over to you, Mr. Sunil.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnan and Mr. Shamsuddin, for that generous introduction. And I think Mr. Krishnan has already pitched the fund effectively in its nuggets. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a little bit in detail, both in terms of the outside and the inside. What do I mean by the outside and the inside? Outside is the world of investing, right? Your economy, your markets, your large cap, mid cap, small cap. There is an opportunity or there is a risk there. And inside is as a customer, right? As what do you look at from the markets, and what should you look at from what type of customer you are. And I'm going to try to marry the two, because I think only that way a very knowledgeable and sensible decision can be taken about investing. So let me start off by showing you the creative for this fund, right? In itself is a story in itself. So first of all, as you know, the name has been given on the right side of the screen. I trust you are all able to see the screen. The name is Sundaram Blue Chip Fund. And just below that, you see that it's an open-ended equity scheme, predominantly investing in large cap stocks. So two things are clear: blue chip and large cap. But that's something which is very apparent. But I just request you to move to the center, and you see this logo saying size matters. Now it's something that intuitively you'll say, yes, large caps mean size, so large caps matter, size matters. But it doesn't end with that, right? There is a linkage here to why we have chosen, on the extreme left of your screen, we are showing the sumo wrestler. And there's a relevance to this, which I will take up as the clue to take you through my presentation. We could have chosen a number of artifacts and people and types to show size, right? There's an elephant, which is a classic example of size. But the reason we chose a sumo wrestler has a relevance to the name of the fund. The reason is that, yes, his size matters, right? To win in the dangle, in the arena, wrestling arena, he needs to be of the size, right? The size matters. But more importantly, there are two other aspects of a sumo wrestler which are very relevant to our fund. The first thing is that both the wrestlers are huge in size, and one is trying to push the other. So what is necessary for a wrestler is absolute stability. He has to sit on his haunches and be like a rock. He cannot allow the other person to push him down. So the size here is not just in terms of the pure size, but it's about the stability. Now, the other aspect of the fund which comes in, right, is the fact that to win the competition, what does he need to do? He has to take the other wrestler and throw him to the ground. Now, that can only happen if he is flexible and agile. So these characteristics of size, flexibility, and stability are all reflective of the name blue chip, right? So that's the reason we chose this. There are videos on YouTube, on television, the IPL, news channels that we are playing a video which shows a wrestling competition between two sumo wrestlers and brings out the point. So I think with that introduction into what this fund is all about, let me now move to the first, to what are the characteristics of large caps, right? Generally, intuitively you know it, but I'd like to summarize it to kickstart it. So the large caps carry following advantages, right? They have proven business model. That's how they've grown large. And having got to a size that matters, they benefit of scale and the competitive moat, which doesn't allow others to enter that arena, right? The third thing which it gives you, the stability, the word that I used, is across business cycles, they're able to retain their position. Smaller companies, they tend to collapse, they tend to go through credit rating downgrades, they find funding hard to raise, but a large company with the stability across business cycle is able to stand there. And more importantly, because of their size, they have wide and deep management bandwidth. Smaller companies are generally owner driven. Something happens to the owner, then you're worried about the future. It's not the case with large companies. And finally, if you look at it from a financial angle, this strength of balance sheet means that when there's a down cycle, they're able to go and acquire good people from smaller companies and also buy companies, right? So growth through M&A. And finally, from a stock market perspective, there is very good liquidity. So when you want to be flexible in changing your portfolio, you don't face a problem of buying or selling the stock. And more importantly, it's a well-researched universe. So there are very few, rarely there are surprises in terms of what you're buying. So that summarizes the large cap space. But like I said, I want to now tell you a little bit about the fund, right? It's a diversified large cap fund. So that's most important to see. So which means it will have about 45 to 50 stocks. We have taken the NSE 100 as a benchmark because SEBI has now defined large caps as the top 100 companies. And max, it can take 20% in mid cap, right? That's a regulation and we will follow that. And the reason for having mid caps at all is only in terms of blue chip and maybe some emerging blue chips, which can grow into large cap. That's kind of a thought process. And portfolio construction, I'll cover this in a little bit more in detail later, right? So moving on, now I want to go inward to you before I come outward to the market, right? Every one of you in various points of time in your investment journey would have looked at a large cap exposure, mid cap, small cap, right? This equity allocation across large, mid and small, what drives it, right? So I just want to take you through the journey of the cap curve. So currently, if you take, I've taken the returns as of last month end, right? Look at the returns of the large cap index, the mid cap index and the small cap index, right? So 1 month to 1 year, right? They're all in green. So first thing is it's a sweet spot for the market that every index and across the time frame from 1 month to 1 year is in green. But more importantly, I want you to look into the table. And if you see the very funny thing that small caps are given a better return at this point for the up to the last 1 year than mid caps. And then mid caps are given better than large caps. So you'll say, what is this? What is Mr. Sunil sir coming and saying to invest in a large cap fund when last 1 year returns tells you that the small caps have done better? Counterintuitive, right? But just go back in time, just a few months back to March 31st, just after the Corona crisis, the collapse of the market. See the 1 year return. I've compared 1 year so that you're talking the same thing. The Sensex was flat 1 year return on 31st March. The mid cap index was down 25% and the large cap, small cap index was down 33%. Ekdam opposite, right? One. Hold your breath. It's not all. Just go back 3 months earlier to December, pre-COVID, pre all this crisis. Large caps were giving double-digit returns. Mid caps was -3%. Small cap was negative, almost 7%. So what explains this bewildering variance that just in the space of 9 months, we have seen the whole world go topsy-turvy? What's happening? As is very clear from this, large, mid and small cap returns vary across time. Now, we have taken a short period of 9 months. How much is the variance over a longer period and what causes that, right? So to understand this, I'm going to use a technology, analytical technique called rolling returns methodology. So this, I consider it to be a bulletproof method of understanding market volatility. So let me take a minute to explain to you this methodology, because only then you will understand why I call it a bulletproof. So generally, like I said, you're looking now, you look 3 months, you're seeing very different pictures. As an investor, however, you want to have a picture that independent of this timing, over a period of time, what returns can I expect? What returns has a market given? How do you take a look at this? Let us say that you have a 3-year outlook. That is, you want to invest with a 3-year time frame in mind. Each investor can have its own choices, right? I'm just taking 3 years, just to explain the technology. So what we do is, you can't take 3 years by just going 3 years back and looking at 3 years. You have to have 3-year returns, a pattern over a long period of time so that you have enough data to say that this has got two things. One, it has taken all scenarios into account. Second, it can have a predictive ability for the future, right? So what we do is, let me, for example, in this next slide, I will be taking you, I've started with January 2004. Now, January 2004 to today, you're talking about 16 and a half years, right? In 16 and a half years, how does the rolling returns technique work? On 1st January 2004, right? You make an investment with a 3-year outlook. When does the 3-year finish? On 31st December 2007, right? So you will have a return at that point in time. Now I take the next day, January 2nd, 2004, and I invest for 3 years, which will go up to 1st January 2008, right? That's another 3 years. 3rd January, 4th January, every single day I can make, and over these 16 years, can you imagine how many 3-year investments I could have made? If I take the average, if I take the maximum, the minimum, don't you think I will get a data over a solid points of time, which can tell you what can I expect in a 3-year return, right? So this technique, that's why I say it's bulletproof, because it takes away the effect of timing. So using this, you get two things. You get a reality, ground reality, one. Second, you get a predictive ability. So let me come to that in a little bit. So this, for example, I've used very similar indices. For the large cap, I've chosen Nifty 100, mid cap, I've chosen Nifty mid cap 100, small cap, I've chosen Nifty small cap 100. What I've done is I've done the rolling return analysis for 3 time peak buckets, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. But all of them starting from 1st January 2004 to today. So as you can now just turn your attention to the table, 3 years, there are 4,992 3-year observations that we have got, right? Similarly, there are 4,261 5-year observations, and there are 2,435 10-year observations. So you can see that I have a solid base that whatever we say now, right, is going to mean that it has got a good population over which we have arrived at the data. And what can you see? That over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, the average returns have all been at the low double-digit levels, regardless of whether you take the large cap, the mid cap, or the small cap. So looking at this, you will arrive at a conclusion that if I'm going to invest on an average, right, it doesn't matter. Mid cap gave me 14, large cap gave me 13, small cap gave me 12. What farak? What does it matter? Just 1% is the difference. Even you take 5 years, the difference is max of 3% in 10 years. So this will lead you to a misleading set of answers. Why? Because this is the average. It's like saying that, for those of you familiar, let's take the Ganga, right? At some points in Haridwar, the Ganga is just 3 feet deep. People go in there and do their puja. At some points in the Rishikesh heights, it is 15 feet high. Now you can say average Ganga is 4 feet, so I'll go across the Ganga. No, because the average is a stupid thing. It's just used to make points, right? The average has no meaning because no investor, very rarely does he experience that average return. So clearly, can you read what I've written there? Clearly, on an average, all the cap curve indices are giving you double-digit returns across time horizons. But averages are misleading as the devil lies in the details, because actual returns can vary widely. Secondly, this variability, right? It's also known as volatility, it's known as risk, different names are given. It varies across the cap curve and varies across time. So now let's try to understand this variability. So what I've done now, in the same set of 3 years, instead of talking averages, I'm talking maximum gain and maximum loss. So just take a look at this. Now we'll discuss only the 3 year, the 5 year and 10 year are available there for you to see, right? And then the story is the same. So in the 3 year, can you see what? The max return in a 3 year investment for the last 16.5 years has been 48% for the large cap, 50% for the mid cap, 70% for the small cap. So clearly, when the times are good, small cap has given you the best return, right? Now let's go down to the maximum loss, that if your time was bad. When does this happen? When you enter at the peak of the market and you're exiting the 3 years at the bottom of the market. Same thing with 5 years, same thing 10 years. You can see that the maximum loss that you got from the large cap in a 3 year investment was 8% loss, right? So your 10 rupees came down by 2%. That's the loss, that 8%, you got the loss. But the small cap loss was 21% per annum. Mind you, these are all annualized returns, not absolute. They are per annum returns, CAGR. You got 21% loss. So as you can see across the table, if you go to 10 years, generally you are safe. The loss patterns and everything kind of disappear. But in 3 years and 5 years, there's clearly a difference. So again, I've summarized it at the bottom of the table. Clearly, large caps give you better protection in bad times, but not as much return as mid and small cap in good times, right? So as an investor, right, you shouldn't be just investing on an average. What should you do? Answer lies, you should try to predict your bad time and predict the good time and do the needful, right? So just to summarize this whole large cap story here at this point is this graph where this is the y-axis, this is the x-axis. So in the y-axis is the return. So you go from low return to high return, and in the x-axis, you're going to risk. So you're going from low risk to high risk. So if you see all the asset classes are there, debt across equity, you can see that the debt is obviously low risk, low reward. And the small cap is high risk, high reward, which is what you saw at the table. And large caps are at the median, which means what? That when you enter the equity asset class, pure equities, leaving balanced funds aside, large caps are the moderate risk, moderate return in the middle of the graph. So now, based on this, right, what can be the basis for deciding an individual investor's asset allocation, right? So I've written there again. So clearly large caps give you, I've repeated this previous sentence, but if you go to the next line, so what do you need to do? If you can get your good times, bad times prediction right, you can make a perfect switch from large to mid to small, minimize losses, maximize returns. Ideal world. You need to have Mr. Bejan Daruwala, astrologer, chief astrologer who recently passed away, to tell you this is the bad time starting, now you exit a small cap. This is a good time starting, now you enter small cap, right? Life is not so simple, right? Why? What decides these good times and bad times? So I have a favorite saying of mine. Normally they say there are two certainties, your death and your taxes that you have to pay, right? I know in the Gulf you are lucky, there are no taxes, but generally. But I have that in the financial world, that there is another certainty, and that is called the business cycle, right? Which you can't avoid. It's a certainty. Now, why is a business cycle a certainty? Because it's a simple thing, whether it's GDP growth or anything that you talk about, corporate performance, it is a marriage of demand with supply. And why do cycles happen is because demand rises in a linear fashion. So either you have 10% per annum growth or you have 5% per annum degrowth. Whatever it is, it's a linear. Year on year, you have a particular growth one way or the other way. But in the case of supply, it cannot go linear. It has to come in bulk. Let me take an example. Take Hero Honda, right? Let's say that he's got 100,000 motorcycle capacity. It's all out of the air, not real numbers. He's selling 95,000 motorcycles today. Now he expects his demand to go up 10% next year. So from 100,000, that is, he will have 105,000 sales next year. He has only 100,000 capacity. Now to cater to next year, he cannot put up 5,000 units capacity. No, he has to put up 50,000. So that for the next 5 to 7 years, because there's a cost of land, building, plant, machinery, borrowing, debt cost, everything. So when he puts up that and takes his capacity to 150,000, imagine next year's situation. This year he was at 95% capacity utilization. Next year he'll be 105,000 sales, but 150,000 capacity. Assume that he put up his capacity in 6 months' time. Normally it takes longer, but I don't want that complication. So he's gone from a 95% capacity utilization to a 60% capacity utilization straight away. So why this is important is because in a corporate, it happens for the economy, but for a corporate specifically, when supply is more than demand, the consumer sets the price. When demand is more than supply, the manufacturer sets the price. So you can imagine the huge difference in his profit margins. When there's a shortage of motorcycles, he can hike the price. But there's an excess supply of motorcycles between him and TVS Motors and Rajdoot and everybody, he has to cut the price. So his profitability goes through swings. So this is the essence of a business cycle, which you cannot get away from. The world over, country specific, world specific, business cycles are there to stay, and they affect our lives very deeply. So that's what I've explained in this. On the left-hand side, I've used the terminology virtuous cycle, means good cycle. On the right-hand side, I'm saying vicious cycle. So here, the top half and the bottom half of each cycle, let's go to the bottom because that drives the top. There is, in a good cycle, there is high demand. So capacity utilization is going up. So the corporates makes better investment, right? And so the supply then comes up. So inflation comes down when supply goes up in the economy. So interest rates come down, which in turn boosts demand because EMI-based purchases go up, whether it's auto or consumer goods or houses or anything. So that's a good cycle at play. In a bad cycle, demand gets depressed. So capacity utilization is going down, so nobody is investing, supply gets into a constraint, so inflation rises, interest rates rise, which further depresses demand. So this going from a virtuous cycle to vicious cycle to virtuous cycle is inevitable over a period of time, right? So this cyclicality of the economy leads to cyclicality in the stock market also. Why? Because all of you know this intuitively, right? The stock market delivers returns through two modes. You get earnings from the company, they give you dividends from their earnings, and then you get money, you make money in the stock market from a PE re-rating. PE is the common thing for valuation, right? So you invested 10 PE, you exited 12 PE, that 2 rupees is your profit. This PE gets re-rated up or down, as you know. So in the PE, there are two reasons why PE can go up or down. One is that current EPS growth you already saw in the previous slide. The next thing which determines the PE is the future expected EPS growth. It can go up or go down, so PE goes up. But more importantly, over and above this earning growth expectation, there is the rising falling demand for stocks. So you can have things move either way. You can have earnings growth expectation rising and demand rising, which means PEs will sharply rise. You can have both falling, which is PEs will fall, or you can have one being countering to the other. That countering is what leads to the difference between the cap curves. I will come to that shortly. Now, so business cycles impact all the three aspects. They impact the current earnings of companies, depending on which virtuous or vicious. It impacts the expectations of future growth, and it impacts the demand also. How I shall address over the period. So the volatility arises because of these fluctuations, right? And so let's look at our stock market now, right? If you see, I've taken data from April 2003, again over the last 17 years. And as you can see, I've clearly demarcated 4 buckets there. A virtuous cycle followed by a vicious cycle, a virtuous cycle followed by a vicious, right? Transmission. What happened? 2003 to 8, the boom time, not just for Indian stock market, for the world. So the economy was booming and the markets were booming. So the 3 lines there you see are the large cap index, mid cap index, small cap index, all were rising. When we came at 2008, you know, the global financial crisis hit us. So the markets corrected like that up to 2013, April, not April, October, just that. Why? Mr. Manmohan Singh, the then Prime Minister, started the reform cycle then, and Mr. Modi came and took over, and the first few years of his term, right till December 2017, a new virtuous cycle had started. Then in December 17, what happened? We had the 1 year after demonetization, the introduction of GST, the negative food inflation in India, and the NBFC crisis, all of it combined to start the next vicious cycle, right? So this is the broad stock market. Don't get into the individual one, because then bottom what I'm saying, if you can read that, I'll segue into the next slide. Mid and small caps do better when the business cycle is in a virtuous phase. You can intuitively see that from the graph, but I wanted to take it through numbers. So those 4, I have fitted it here. So I put both the virtuous on the left, both the vicious on the right. So now if you look at the virtuous cycle, you will see that it's all green. That is when the cycle is virtuous, large, mid and small cap in the course of the cycle over the period deliver positive returns and healthy positive returns, strong double-digit growth, all the 3. But just peek into the table. As you can see, in a good cycle, the small cap index, first one gave 77, mid cap gave 63, all per annum, and large cap gave 49. So again, small caps are done better than mid cap, and mid caps are done better than large cap. Same story is repeated in the next virtuous cycle down below. Fine. So in a good cycle, the stock market benefits, but small caps benefit more than mid caps benefit more than large caps. But you go to the right hand side and the bad cycle, see what happens. Large caps are able to hold their ground. In the first vicious cycle, they were at 0% return. You didn't lose your money. But in the second one, you are at 5% positive, whereas in both the times, you can see the mid-cap index has delivered 8% or 7% per annum negative return, and the small cap 13% and 10% negative returns, right? So can you see those good times and bad times when I said that you can switch your portfolio if you get this position of the cycle and investment right, you can make those decisions. So this is what I summarized there, right? Large caps give you protection in bad times, don't give you as much return as mid and small in good times. If you can get your business cycle prediction right, you can make the perfect switch from large to mid to small, minimize loss, maximize risk. Sorry, somebody speaking?
No,
is it fine? Yeah, okay. Right. So that is where an understanding is critical of the stage of the economy is in the business cycle to make the asset allocation decision. And fund managers, however, regardless of the cycle, are able to find multi-baggers across cap covers. So if you see here, I've shown the 2003 to 8, 2008 to 13, and 13 to 19. I've taken 13 to 19 as one block because the recent drop has been too short. So I've taken that as a period. As you can see, the blue is the large caps, the red is the mid caps, and the purple is the small caps. In a bad cycle, the number of multi-baggers come down, but still you can find multi-baggers. In a good cycle, you can find, but you can see that from a stock perspective, you can find multi-baggers in each of the cap curves across. It's just information. So now let me move on to the economic outlook. Right? I started with your outlook on your side. We go to the economy, and then we'll come back to you to wrap it up. So on the economic outlook, we are trying to assess the cycle. Right? So the first thing first is that before the coronavirus, before the lockdown, the point to remember is that the Indian economy has been in a slowdown for the last 2.5 years. So as you can see, the components of the Indian economy are services, industry, and agriculture. And right from the Q4 2018 financial year, the economy has been down. So why I'm saying right now, we are looking at the coronavirus as the main villain, and the lockdown is what caused the further crisis. But the fact is, Indian economy has been in a slowdown for a very long period of time. Then came the coronavirus and the Q1 GDP performance, which you would have seen. Right? India, of all the top countries, we have taken the G7 for comparison, has been the worst affected in this downturn. What is the reason for that? Because we imposed the most severe lockdown in the world and for the longest period of time. Naturally, because the humanitarian mindset and the fact that we don't have the medical, hospital, doctors, nurses, that capacity if this really spreads like wildfire. So we had no choice but to do that. But in the process of the lockdown, we hurt our economy to the extent of 24%. Right? So which segments got dropped most? Industry was down 38%, services was down 39%, agriculture was the positive at 3.5%. So cyclicality of the economy wise, clearly we are bang in the middle of a vicious cycle. Naturally, this leads to cycling in the stock market. So you saw this number, I've highlighted just this one, +5, -7, -10, right? Now, I want to talk to you about this. The three components that I mentioned, I wanted to take you through to explain this returns. So the EPS growth, right, that fluctuates. So just see this. So what happens? Large caps are less affected during all the three aspects. So let me explain to you, because I showed you that 5% return, what happens. So in the current EPS, right, look at the earnings sheet. So this is the overall market, the earnings after tax. The sales reflects the GDP impact. The EBITDA is the operating margin, which reflects the competitiveness of the companies, and the profit after tax is what the shareholder gets. So the overall market was down 51% in terms of PAT YOY in the first quarter of the year. But if you take away the banks, which had a good time because they got cheap money from RBI and they didn't bring down the rates so much, 71% down. Now, when you split it up into large caps, mid caps, small caps, and micro caps, you can clearly see that the large caps are generally the least affected. This time the mid caps have also done decently, but the small caps have got badly affected, and the micro caps, which are heavily, very badly affected. So can you see that first thing, in a down cycle, the large caps and the larger mid caps are able to hold their space from an earnings perspective. So the first reason why large caps don't fall as much, in fact, they showed positive, I'll come to that soon, but they don't fall, is because on the EPS graph, right, when you see this, right, EPS, they get less affected by than the smaller companies in the market, right? The next is the expectation of future growth. Now, the immediate earnings outlook is still weak. Why? Because we talked about 24% negative GDP growth last quarter. Friends, next quarter is going to be again a 9% negative GDP growth. The next quarter after that is going to be a 1.5% GDP growth negative, and then you're going to have a 2% positive. So that's where you talked about a V-shaped recovery. It's going to be less negative and less negative. It's going to take time to turn positive, because only when the GDP growth turns positive can corporate earnings turn positive. So the immediate earnings outlook, right, reinforces the fact that the economy is going to continue to be in a negative GDP territory in the immediate future, right? Next, we come to the rising falling demand for stocks, right? Now, in the earnings expectations and then the rising demand, right? One of the main things which has driven the market upwards and we should be aware of, and why large caps deliver positive returns even during a bad cycle, is FII flows. In markets like India, FIIs are big players in the market. I think of the total space of the large caps, 35% is owned by FIIs, right, of the base itself. So since April, in this quarter period to now, FIIs have brought in $11 billion, which in rupees is about 83,000 crores. Now you must be wondering, why is this happening? Economy is down, GDP is down, earnings are down, but the FIIs are pumping in money. Well, first, they are pumping in money because they have money. Now, why they're choosing India Health is come to, but they're pumping in money because that. Now, why do they have money? Because in the liquidity scenario, so I'd like to take you back to this chart here of rising, falling demand for stocks. Sorry, I had that here. Large caps, mid caps, and small caps go through very different liquidity situations in a downturn. Why? Typically in a downturn, especially when there's a global downturn, right? Not a country specific downturn. When there's a global downturn, the global countries, their central bankers, first thing they do is rate cut. Second thing they do is rate note printing. You can call it liquidity, you can call it quantitative easing. There are multiple words to use for this, bond purchase, all kinds of things. But end of the day, they are printing money. So to get their countries out of a recession, they want trying to print their way out of a recession. They're trying to artificially boost. It's like giving an insulin injection to a diabetic. So what happens is that their intentions are that that liquidity will go and improve the economic conditions in their country. But the problem is nobody has a control on where that money goes. Market participants take that cheap money and they put the money where they see returns happening, not necessarily in their own country. So if they feel that China has a better growth prospect, they'll take the money to China. Because like water finds its own level, monetary liquidity also finds its own level. So contrary to normal things, these large companies, because of their lesser impact on the earnings, the lesser impact on the future earnings, their stability, these companies, people come and invest there. So actually in a contrary way, in a depression or in a recession or in a downturn, larger companies get a preferential liquidity of much better scale than normal. Whereas in mid and small caps, what happens is that normal investors, mutual funds who look at fundamentals, normal investors, retail, they get panicky looking at the numbers and the numbers scare them even more. So there's a drying up of liquidity generally in the mid and small cap space. So one of the main reasons for the stability of large cap returns is this Keynesian model where governments try to pump prime the economy, but that leakage that happens comes and helps the larger companies in the stock market. So that's where the large caps. So as I explained, that's the reason that in the same period that the large cap FIIs pumped in money, mutual funds were selling 17,000 crores. Why are they selling? Because they don't see an immediate future. For the large cap person, he's investing because it's a relative investment. He's comparing it to other countries. I will come to that. But for a mutual fund in India, he's comparing it to saying, should I keep my money where? If the large cap fund managers are buying FII, let me sell and keep the cash for a correction to buy. So they are not in a mood to buy even more at this rate, is the behavior so far. So that's another point to remember. So that short-term outlook is of a vicious cycle, but there is a need to be flexible in the future. Why is that? Because even in this Q1 GDP, there are some positives. What are the two positives? Government spending and agriculture. So government spending, if you see right through the recession, the slowdown that happened in the Indian economy, they have been doing double digit. And in this Q4 and Q5, they have actually upped their expenditure to 14 and 16%. So government spending will have its effect ultimately in the economy. That's a good sign. The next is agriculture. As you saw already, it's about 3.5% positive, but the outlook is much more positive. The reason being that during the Corona crisis, it was exactly the time for the Kharif crop sowing. So this Kharif crop sowing, as it gets harvested, it's an excellent growth. I'll just show you the slide, right? That will lead to a future growth in agricultural GDP. So there are these green shoots coming from these two factors. The agricultural good feelings and the government spending is showing itself by another factor which is giving a good outlook to the economy in the future is that at the end of the moratorium period, there is a fear on what's going to happen and all those people are going to come and forced to repay what they took. So RBI came up with a very timely resolution framework, set up the Kamath committee to ease the debt burden by saying that I will give you an extended period to pay instead of having to pay now. So instead of just providing a moratorium extension, they said we'll give you a much longer restructured time frame. So the Kamath committee has come up with this recommendation, and as per the framework, 66% of all rated companies are likely to benefit. So see, triple B and above, as long as a decent credit rating, 71% of the companies qualified. Naturally, when you go down the credit curve, those who are already bad will not get that much benefit. But this is a huge positive for the banking sector and for those sectors which have borrowed heavily at high interest rates like construction, real estate, and chemicals. They are the ones who are the key beneficiary of the Kamath Committee restructuring program. Next, let's focus on rural India. I said agricultural growth. So in rural India, Kharif crop sowing has been fantastic. Right from June, week on week, if you see the percentage of normal areas sown, it has gone up and now reached 100% of normal areas, which in comparison to the last 7 years is the best. It's at a 7-year high. So clearly this augurs well. Why did this happen? Two reasons for it. Maybe three, I can even call it. So first is the monsoon came on time. So it benefited. The farmer felt that, yes, I've got the right conditions to sow my crop. Second, because of the lockdown and the migrants going from urban to rural, you had a huge supply of labor. So he could easily plant saying there's more labor available cheaply. The third aspect is the Rabi crop was also good. So the farmers had a good harvest. That's why the 3.5% GDP growth. They had the money to buy the fertilizer, pesticide and everything and go and sow well. So all of these, when does this crop harvest? Your Pongal for South India, your Baisakhi for North India, all towards the winter, this crop will be coming. So we can look forward. That's one of the reasons that the GDP growth is expected to turn positive in the last quarter of the financial year, is the agricultural thing. And this is having a spillover benefit in the sense that the government allocated 40,000 crore more to the NREGA program. So as a result, year on year, job demand has gone up 40% YOY in the rural areas, and the money in their hands means that two-wheelers and passenger vehicles, which are the prime personal moving vehicles that rural Indians buy, from a deep 100% negative in April, has now shown a V-shaped recovery. It's still negative, but it's a recovery. So they have favorably recovered, but there is a key motor vehicle which is used in agriculture. That's the tractor. That has turned from an 84% negative to a 24% YOY positive. So clearly, rural India is taking the lead in terms of the recovery of the Indian economy. And when you then move to the urban side, you see that there is improvement here, not as sharp as in rural. The V's are very, very flattish. Looking at some of those indicators, traffic congestion. For a change, we are celebrating traffic congestion pickup, right? Then television ads. People are working from home, sitting at home, nothing to do with what TV. So the television ad business is showing a good growth, and that's why we are also advertising on TV for our new fund. Then the government purchasing, I told you already, double digit. So average e-way bill generated, again, has shown a V-shaped recovery. Then freight movement, whether it's the bulk commodities like cement, steel, coal, fertilizer, all are showing varying degrees of V-shaped recovery. So the total freight is indicating that it's on the way forward, right? Electricity consumption with industrial consumption and personal thing is also showing a recovery. And overall unemployment has dropped to pre-COVID levels. Urban is lagging a bit behind rural, but clearly the economy has come back in terms of re-employing those in the urban areas, in the rural areas, because of the NREGA and the Kharif sowing, right? So overall, there's an economic activity indicator which a company called Jeffrey Smiths They put together all various inputs and come up with this. And their estimate is that we are at 90% of the pre-COVID levels today, according to them, right? So the two key indicators for the short-term GDP growth are services, the PMI, Purchase Managers Index, which tells you about if they are buying more, it means the future is good, their order book is good. So services has shown a V shape, but it's still at 42, because only when the PMI goes above 50 can you say the economy has turned positive. So it's still not come to full positive, whereas manufacturing has done a V and crossed the 50% level, right? So in short, in the medium term, short to medium term, we're expecting a V-shaped recovery, right? This is partly because of those green shoots, partly because I think we initially successfully contained the infection through the lockdown, and there is an expectation that in about a year's time, a vaccine or a cure would be out, which means after that, you're only looking at an improving situation, right? So this is the way the V shape occurs. But to put it in numbers, this is the IMF's estimate done a couple of months ago, which says that this calendar year, India will be down minus 4.5% GDP. But the very next year, we are going to show a 6% positive growth, right? To that extent, however, I would caution that there are still some risk factors which need to be tracked to ensure that this V-shaped recovery is on track. The first risk factor is that the initial success in the infection containment. So you see March, April, May, June, and then when the cases started coming down, rural India was only having 20% of the cases, 80% of the cases were in urban India. But last 2 months, rural India's share has shot up to 36 and then 47. In fact, from June to August, urban case rise has been 3.3 times, but rural case has been double that at 7.4. Why is this a risk? Because of three factors again. One, if it spreads wildly, then your labor for harvesting the Kharif crop could be at risk. Second, if it spread wildly, the normal Diwali sentiment when people buy new things. If each family has got somebody affected by COVID, his mood, his consumer confidence to go and purchase will get affected. The third aspect is that if this sustains, the government, and Mr. Modi is holding a conference with the chief ministers very shortly, where they may reimpose the lockdown. So after the unlock, if you reimpose a lockdown, you're going to bring again the economic crisis back because it's going to artificially constrain demand. So these are risk factors. So you have to track the case rise of COVID very closely to look at whether the V shape is going to be that sharp or a bit flatter and take a little more time, right? And the other risk factor is, while I've shown two-wheelers, cars and tractors is going well over last year, trucks and buses, though freight is going up, we have excess capacity in the trucking industry, and it's only at 17% of last year, and three-wheelers are at about 40% of last year, right? And on retail, while it's on the recovery path, we are still a long way to go because business is 52% lower in August compared to last year. So while the future outlook looks good, there are factors we need to track to make sure that it's on track, right? So hence, from that economic thing, as I said, the economic cycle translates into the stock market, right? Now, when you look at what's happened to the large cap, mid cap, you can see from the peak of the valuation, right? Because what I said, that's the future, right? You look at the way the valuation is moved for the Nifty from 17.8 peak, today the Nifty is at 19.1. There's a 1.3 improvement in the P ratio, higher P ratio, right? Which is indicative of the fact that they expect the large caps to recover faster, right? Whereas mid cap is down 7.5%, small cap is down 3.2 in P ratio, indicative of the outlook, right? So now when you focus on the large caps, now we are moving to the forward looking thing and looking at the FII flows. So why is the outlook turned favorable? Because this V-shaped recovery in large caps is expected to play out in the very next year in 21-22. And you can look at how the large cap earnings are expected to bounce back much faster than the mid and small cap at this point, because the Nifty EPS at around 450 for the last 4 years is expected in April 21-22 to be 664. So one reason that FII money is flowing is they can clearly see that the larger companies are going to benefit from the V-shaped recovery and show a strong jump in their earnings. This is one reason. Another reason why foreign money is coming in is the fact that from a valuation perspective, both inter se with other countries and with our long-term average. So if you look at this, overall valuations in the country, the S&P is the highest valuation, the emerging markets are the lowest. So emerging markets are still cheaper compared to the rest. But within the emerging market and in the comparison to the world, there are two lines here. The green line, the top line, shows India's premium with respect to other emerging markets. And the blue line below shows India's premium with respect to the world markets. So as you can see, what has been happening is that over the last 2 years, India's premium has been correcting sharply. Whereas you take our long-term average, it's been much higher. So FIS have felt that a country like India is now looking much more attractive. And that's why they've started putting money, and you can see those valuations started creeping up. So India's relative, though we are at a premium, India has always been at a premium, and it is a historical trend of the premium which has corrected, making India very, very attractive. The second thing is that when FIS come in, it's very important to remember that unlike mutual funds, who generally have a 3 to 5 year outlook on everything, right? That's what we expect from the customers. We keep telling the customers that you have a range of FIS in the market. So somebody who came with that FY22 outlook would have been a hedge fund who's got money, cheap money, he's put in 20%, borrowed 80%, and looking at a good gain over the short run. But there are at the same time, given the correction in the Indian market, FIIs who have a very long-term outlook on India, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or pension funds, a sovereign wealth fund. So for them, they don't care what's happening now or in the immediate future, because he wants returns from this market, from the GDP growth of the country, from a 10-year perspective. Because in that market grows, his liability for pension is that. So he is segregating that. So, but their inflow today affects the market, the valuation, the stock prices, and the returns you make today, though he's investing from a longer term. So without looking at the long-term outlook that the FII is looking at, we can't take an investment decision today, even if you don't have that 10-year outlook for your investment, because this money will come in over the next few years. So what is this positive long-term outlook? It is the strong structural advantage for India in comparison to China. And this is a huge thing. So if you look at it, the red line here, as it goes up and down, is China's labor supply. So as you can clearly see, from the year 2017, China has been in a declining. Why? One family, one child. Long back was implemented, right? And whereas India is on a rising labor trend, the blue-black line, right up to the year 2050. So for the next 30 years, India is on a rising labor supply trend. China is on a declining. If you want to capture this in numbers to look the magnitude of the impact from 2017, when the decline started, just take the next 10-year period. China is going to lose at the bottom of this table, if you can see, 21 million people from their working age population. Whereas India, in the same 10-year period, is going to add 116 million people to the working age population. Right? Like the famous Hindi saying is there, no, Zameen Asman ka farak hai. Sorry to have suddenly slipped into Hindi, but I couldn't find a better expression to express this. And the beauty is, thanks to our education system, right? The technical education, the English speaking skills, the pharmacies, the medical colleges, everything, whether it's basic skills, moderate skills, advanced skills, in all our competing countries which are going to compete for that business which is going to move out of China because of the labor, we are in a good position to have supply everywhere across the curve. But perhaps even more important than these 2 points is the point that thanks to China's success, their per capita GDP is today $10,000 per person. India's is at $2,000 per person. What's the point here? The point is Chinese labor is 5 times more expensive than Indian labor. So you have labor supply advantage for 30 years, and you have a labor cost advantage. So the situation is ripe, and it is further aided by the COVID crisis, when all those MNCs with factories in China say that 44% are saying that their intention to relocate out of China has increased because of COVID. As a result, we are looking at today the fact that about $450 billion of exports are likely to shift out of China, partly by Chinese companies themselves shifting because they themselves are suffering the labor shortage, and partly by MNCs shifting. So naturally, the Chinese companies are likely to shift to Vietnam. So Vietnam is going to take it a third as per today's calculation of this export shift. But India is at second place with 69 billion. And in the coming years, this is going to rise sharply. Why? Because India has been a magnet for FDI. So already this process has started. Right now, if you see India's FDI flows at $70 billion are at an all-time high. What is the issue here? It is already high, but it's mostly now coming into the private equity space, into the internet and related startup companies like Paytm, Zomato, Swiggy, and all of that. We need it to come into manufacturing to create jobs, right? So government has been taking a number of initiatives to get more FDI. Most important of those being the halving 35 to 17% are tax rate for a new company to set up. So today we are at par with the best in the world, which is Singapore. Every other country is behind us. Not only the tax cut, the fact that we abolished dividend distribution tax is a huge positive for FDI, because any FDI manufacturer, when he sets up, how can he take his money back? Only from the profits paid back as dividends. And if you're going to tax that, it was a negative. By removing that, India has straight away improved the feasibility for FDI. And for sovereign wealth funds, we are given 100% tax exemption, interest, dividend, and capital gains if they invest in infrastructure for 3 years. So financially, India has cleared the path. Then GST reform, building the roads, licensing, increasing FDI limits, opening up the public sector for foreigners to come in, or private sector, ease of doing business rankings. In the last 5 years, India has changed, improved its ranking by 79 ranks, by far the best improvement in the world. So from a foreigner who looked at us in 2015 to looking at it now, there's a huge difference in the way India is perceived. So specific also, these are all general things. Government is proactive and willing to act on specific sectors. I've chosen one, electronic manufacturing. They just launched a $7 billion plan called the Production Linked Incentive Scheme, where they are offering 4 to 6% on incremental sales as cash incentive for 5 years. And they closed the scheme on 31st July. 22 companies filed their applications, of which, if you see, majority are Samsung and Apple's manufacturers. Apple has 37% of world mobile sales revenue and Samsung 22. So 60% of the world's mobile phone manufacturing with components can shift to India with this, manufacturing 11 lakh crore of mobile phone and components and generating 12 lakh jobs. I just chose one sector to tell you how the government is sensitive to this whole opportunity and willing to act at specific pockets of opportunity. Right? So to summarize, India has now become among the most attractive globally because you put the three main criteria: finance, people, business. Financial attractiveness because of our tax rates, people skills I already discussed, and business environment being the ease of doing business. You add it all together, we are already among the most attractive globally. As a result of this, what's going to happen is that there's a tectonic shift. So if you see 16-year periods of countries moving their GDP, 1992, India was nowhere, China was 10. Next 16 years, China went from 10 to 3, US of course remained at top. But from 2008 to 24 period, China is going to overtake the US to 1, but India, which is nowhere in the top 10, 16 years ago of 2008, is going to straight away become the third largest economy in the world. This is what that FDI and the FII money is looking at, and that's why, you see, India is the only country in the emerging countries to get positive FII flows from April to date. Every one of the other countries in the emerging world has seen an outflow. This is the reason, hence, we think that FII outlook is likely to remain favorable to India, but is there going to be sustainable liquidity? Absolutely. Because I talked about how the recession, coronavirus recession has led to rate action, monetary stimulus, fiscal stimulus. So you can see rates global policy rates are down from 2% to 0.2%. So cheap money is available. Next, they have expanded their balance sheet, just the G4. Just look at the graph. It's like the tower, right? Third, mutual fund money, which flew out in the corona crisis, has hit the bottom, historic bottom, that every recession, it goes down up to 1% of negative market cap, 1% negative. And then it shoots up. So that's the where we are poised in terms of the monetary flow. And $3.5 trillion of all this liquidity has gone in sitting in cash with no return. What are they doing? They're just waiting for risk to be back on the table so they can move back. So in our estimate of the 3.4 trillion, $2 trillion is ready and waiting to move into equities. And you're seeing that in the US equity markets already in terms of the Nasdaq's 43% one-year return change, and the Dow and the S&P 22%. And for the next foreseeable future, estimates are that $13 trillion more of asset purchases, note printing, is going to happen. And you also saw the Fed's recent minutes, right? For the next 3 years, they're talking about keeping rates close to zero. So there is enough sustainable liquidity available, and all of it is headed to where? The large cap space in India, right? And further, whenever, it's not like it's going to be a continuous day-on-day flow, right? There are risk factors. There are times when money will flow out. Domestic MF AUM, though they sold in these last 4-5 months because of their outlook, the AUM also has a bias towards large cap. So 30% of the AUM in the MS industry is dedicated large cap funds. Plus, if you take the multi-caps and the other ones which are going to put money, close to 68% of the domestic equity AUM, 6.6 lakh crore, is large cap. So FIIs sell anytime, there is enough liquidity in the mutual fund market to buy it, right? So that's support. And further, the SEBI's multi-cap guidelines, all of you who have exposure to India may, let me quickly take you through this, is that what it's changed it's made the flexi-cap nature of multi-cap into a fixed, small, mid, large, right? That's what this slide tells you. So now it's become from a large cap oriented flexi-cap to a riskier multi-cap on a fixed basis, which can be any one of these ratios. So before, you had roughly, the industry had put 74% in large caps, 16% in mid caps, and 6% in small caps. And there is an expectation that immediately this would move. 41,000 crores would move out of large cap into this. But I don't think that's going to happen. I'm a contrarian here. I'll tell you the reason why. Because the domestic mutual fund industry had put 74% in large cap when they had the flexibility because of the outlook of the economy, the vicious cycle, and all of that, and they had favored it. Now, just because SEBI changes the rule, the fund manager is not in the mood just to buy small cap because SEBI says buy small cap. What will they do? So AMCs will either recategorize their large fund, mid cap, multi cap into large cap fund or large and mid cap if they don't have that, or they'll merge it with their large cap or large and mid cap fund if they have, or they will tell the investors and distributors saying, please switch into our large cap and large and mid cap. So all of these three actions will not lead to any selling of large caps or buying of mid and small caps in the market. Only some AMCs which choose to then follow the new guidelines may sell large caps and buy mid and small caps, because supporting this is the investor actions. Because depending on the investor's risk appetite, if he was conservative, that is, he wanted it because he saw 74% large cap, lower risk reward, he will straight away now switch. And that's what we're advising people. Please switch. If you're conservative and you came because of the 75% large cap, switch to large caps. So again, no action in the market because of that. Next, if he's moderate, there is a category called large and mid cap. Again, if they switch, very little action in the market, maybe a little bit in the mid cap space. And if the last line, if they were comfortable with the risk reward, now that is higher risk reward, then you do nothing. But most people, if they thought that there is a flexibility advantage, they came in. That is 75% today, but tomorrow it could be 50% small and mid. If they felt right, they will have to do it themselves. So they are the people who will now reallocate the money, and that reallocation I believe will again happen to a large extent in large cap because of the market situation. So I don't think that this SEBI circular, the initial impact that small cap started, and why the small cap rose despite the fact that no fund manager was selling, was because the people who held the stocks are expecting this to happen and not selling. So they're tightening the liquidity further. There was a bounce back, right? So in that perspective, I believe that there is going to be enough liquidity in the large cap space. So now we come back to you. From the external economy, I'm coming back to you, to the internal you. So how to go about with the right equity cap curve mix, given all that I've laid out, right? So there's a process, right? I'm sure all of you are following, but I just want to take you through that. So first you decide your goals and come up with a financial plan, right? With the help of an advisor, right? Next point, once the goals and financial, everybody has a goal, you judge your own risk appetite. Again, advisor there to help you do that. And a simple suggestion, don't overcomplicate it. People do 5-point scale, 10-point scale. Simple suggestion, keep it either you're aggressive or you're moderate or you're conservative. What decides this? Your genetics, your upbringing as a child, how your parents were, your dependencies around you, and your basic temperament, right? These are all the things. So decide that for yourself. Next, don't put all your eggs in one basket, because as you saw, there is wide variance in returns. So in consultation with advisor, you diversify your basket across cap curve specific mutual funds and then evaluate it in the context of the business cycle. So that being said, that same rolling returns methodology, I'm going to bring now to judge you, help you judge your risk appetite. Because as I said before, this analytical method has a predictive capacity using past behavior. So this is now the same data. I've used it as a probabilities. That is, if all those 4,992 observations of the 3-year bucket, what is the risk of capital loss? That is, in that 3 years, what is the chance that end of 3 years, your 10 rupees or whatever you put didn't come back to your 10, came lesser? In the large cap, that is 7%. Mid cap, it is 15% chance of a loss. Small cap, it is 26%. So can you see in a 3-year time frame, your small caps have 4x the probability that you will not get back your capital. That is the risk part of it, right? You can also look at the probability of the reward. So what are the rewards you come from equity investment? You don't want just capital protection, right? That's why I have not put that there. You want first to beat inflation. That's the idea of the equity markets. Or some people who are a little more greedy will want double-digit returns. Or some people who are even more greedy will say, no, equity market is high risk, I want 15% returns. So I've shown you those probabilities there, and I've colored it as red, green, because look at the color code on the right. In the case of beating inflation, I've used 75% of the time. If it beats inflation, then it's green, right? Otherwise, it's a red, just as a thought process. If 50% of the time you've got double-digit return, I put it as green. And if 25% of the time you've got the super returns of 15% per annum, I put it as green. So just by the color code, you can see broadly, what can you see? That large caps have the lowest probability of capital loss, but they give you comparable high return probabilities. So look at the probability of double-digit return, 54, 64, 49. Small cap, mid cap, large cap, the probability, if you stayed for 3 years, take 5 years, 58, 64, 51. Take 10 years, 54, 81. So in the mid caps are clearly the better, but between large caps and small caps, they're roughly the same. So why I'm saying this, so your risk perception will decide the allocation. And this table is very useful for you to say, what is my capacity to take a loss? When you all talk about this risk reward aggressive means I'm willing to take rewards for significant losses for significant periods in the hope of getting that 15% return. What? Whereas the conservative says, no, bhaiya, I don't want to take greater risk, but I want decent returns, right? That's what aggressive, moderate, and conservative are. So large caps are suitable to those investors who want capital appreciation over the medium term, but with lower volatility. So it is not just a seeking a reward, you have to blend the risk of the asset class and your risk appetite. That blend only will decide this. So based on the allocation risk profile, I'm going to suggest certain equity allocation in the context of where we are today. Where are we? We are in a vicious cycle with a green light coming up, right? In the future. The time of that may be a little bit down. So if you are an aggressively oriented investor, first, in today's scenario, you have to have a 5-year horizon. One. Two, you have to have flexibility because we are in a V shape. So it's not a fill it, shut it, forget it time. So I would suggest that today, even if you're aggressive, you put 50% in large caps and 30 in mid, 20 in small. But 1 year later, you can look at, and this 1 year is not fixed. It is again, you're going to track the coronavirus, track the vaccine, tax the world recovery, track the Indian recovery. So it could be anywhere between 9 months to 18 months. Then you can look at reducing the large cap component and adding the riskier small caps to your portfolio. So for an aggressively oriented investor, this is my suggestion. If you are moderate, then I would suggest you put 70% in large caps, 20 in mid, 10 in small, which is roughly what the multi-cap was. So if you are a traditional multi-cap investor, this suits you, but today you have to do it yourself. So you have to now move out of that multi-cap fund because you don't know what the future is going to look like, and put your money into large cap 70%, mid cap 20, small cap 10. And after a year, you can look at moderating it by upping the mid and small, right? Same. If you're a conservatively minded person, then I would say don't touch small caps today. Right? Though the market, it has been rising, I'm saying stay away because there are a lot of different reasons why it's rising. Keep your 80% large cap, 20% mid cap. Maybe a year later, when you see the recovery, you can add the 10% tadka of a small cap to your portfolio. So this, given the current context and the need for thing, this is the way I say. So effectively what I'm saying, especially for the next 1 year, the portfolio should have a bias towards large cap with the flexibility to alter it, reasons being the current state of the business cycle. But in fact, I'm saying that if you say, oh, Sunil sir, you have told me all kinds of complicated economy, my risk appetite, JFO. Or you say, no, I thought this will happen, you changed this thing. I'm saying that, forget all of that. Large caps can still form the core part of your portfolio at all times, even if you ignore all that I said. Why am I saying that? You look at this on a point-to-point return basis today, right? Large caps over the last, 15 years, 20 years have given you 11% per annum. So there's not a dirty return, but you're saying point to point. You said, sir, you should see rolling returns. Okay, in rolling returns, you look at it. Why should large cap form? Because you take, and now I've taken two indices here, Nifty 100 and Nifty 50. You'll see there's not much difference in the returns, right? If you see the average returns that you got, and this is rolling returns average, a little more reliable than just point to point, right? It is because you're doing. You got 12% in 3 years, you got almost 11% in 5 years, and you got 11%. So that 11% today is a very good thing that it is actually the large cap average, right? That's number one. But wait. Let's look at the risk reward equation. No, that's what I was telling you. So I'm saying, what is the thing? Large cap should form a core part of your portfolio because they have a good reward potential with good probabilities also. So the top table tells you what is the maximum you got if your timing was good, right? Which is today probably because you are in a vicious cycle, and in 3 years time you could be exiting in a good cycle. 5 years time, definitely. So in large caps, the history is telling you that when you got a good timing, entering in a bad, exiting in a good, you got 3 years, you got 48% per annum return, 5 years, you got 25% per annum return, and in 10 years, you got 18% per annum. All healthy, well, good. So if the timing is good, you should buy large caps, you are getting decent, healthy returns. Forget about all the asset allocation, everything. Oh, you could have got 20 in mid cap and 22 in small cap. Oh, forget it. Are you unhappy with 18? So if you had not done any other than just trusted large caps, you would still have got a good. And what is the probability? So I've taken here only one probability, beating the inflation. Because ultimately as a core, you say, I want. Because what is investment? Friends, investment is nothing but postponing consumption. Correct? You could have bought something with your money spending today. Instead of that, you want to spend it tomorrow. And if it grows faster, you can buy a bigger car, better holiday, whatever it is, right? So beating inflation probability, look at it. In 3 years' time, large cap is not only giving you good returns, it is giving you 70% probability of beating inflation, for 3 years and 5 years. And if you date it 10 years, there's a 90% probability that you would have got. And what is inflation here? I've taken 7%, far higher than the current rates, because over history, India has been at 7. I've just taken 7. So large caps should be a core, because on the risk reward, they give you good reward with good probabilities of good reward. Whereas on the risk side, they should form a core portfolio because there is a low loss potential with low loss probabilities. So just look at this. Both the Nifty and the Nifty 100, in 3 years, your minimum returns are only 7% per annum in a worst case scenario. If 3 years later, the economy is worse than today, that's what this is, right? Or 5 years, it's only 2% per annum. And if it's 10 years, no loss. You're assured of getting at least a 4% return. That's a negative scenario. But the probability of capital loss is very low. The maximum loss is 7%, but the probability of that also happening is only 5%. And if you take it for 5 years, it's only 1.5%. So 98% of the time, you wouldn't lose capital in 5 years. And in 10 years, too, no problem at all. So I hope I've made the case that whatever it is, even if you said, I don't want to do all of that exercise, and you blindly trusted in large caps, it's still the best asset class for you from this perspective, right? And that's the reason why we feel that our fund, and now I'm going to take you through the key parts of our fund. So all the while I've discussed large caps, I've stuck to the index, right? So now as a fund manager, what can we do to do better than the index, right? So here is where stock picking matters even in large caps. So what happens here? I've taken the Nifty 100, which is the benchmark of our fund. I've taken it for 10 years, from 2009 to 2019, 10 years. If you put 100 rupees at 2009, the Nifty 100 would have returned 240 rupees. But if you had taken those 46 stocks, what are those 46 stocks? They are the ones which have been consistently in the index throughout this 10-year period. That is good quality stocks, which have never had a correction, so they went out of the Nifty 100. If you had picked those 46 stocks and stuck with it, which is what a fund manager is supposed to do, you would have got 289 rupees for your 100, which means you got 49 rupees for 100, which is 49% more returns. So that's where a fund manager's skill comes in, right? These are the kind of large caps which have shown that kind of a compounding in the long term. All of you are familiar with these names, and we will be using a very disciplined and diligent, typical Sundaram approach to identifying these stocks. And I gave the name blue chip, right? So we are going to use the blue chip as a filter for quality. What does blue chip mean? Blue chip is 3 meanings: management quality, business model quality, financial quality. What do I mean by management quality? Cover corporate governance, credible management, capable management. Business model, competitive advantage, strong process and systems, right? And a brand value, which will take it through down cycles and up cycles. And financial quality is profits, not just paper profit, cash profits. And that cash profit will help it to fund its capex initially with this cash, so that its debt, its borrowing is less and the equity is high. So low debt equity ratio. Now, all these 3 quality frameworks are not stock market matters, right? There's no value here, no P ratio here, no earnings growth in terms of per share, nothing. These are the fundamentals of the business. Now you could choose fundamental business, but does the market respect it? Now, how to judge it? I think that it does. You will also think it does, but there's a small exercise I did. That there are 35 large cap funds in the industry. What I did is there are only 7 AMCs which have named their fund blue chip fund. Okay. Now, I agree that Sundaram's definition of blue chip and another AMC's definition of blue chip could be very different. But we can all agree that the processes may be different, but the reason they're doing blue chip is they're seeking quality. So at least you can say that they're ultimately trying to reach quality. So what I did is I took those 7 funds, looked at their returns 1 to 7 years. I took the large cap category average and the BSE 100. Believe it or not, these blue chip funds have beaten it, not only the large cap average, but also the index. So what we are saying is that the stock market respects quality. You do the quality on the business model, but the stock market respects quality is what is coming through as evident from this. So in that context, I want to take you through 3 case studies to tell you how we look at the blue chip. These are all companies, these three, which we have got in our portfolio, bought them some years ago, studied them. So we are comfortable, and they also are blue chips even today. So first is Tata Consumer. It came about with the merger of Tata Tea, Tata Salt, Tata Coffee, all of those. Carries the Tata brand name with it. It's a huge consumer giant now. And if you look at its financials, from 2017 when we acquired it, 6,800 crores was the sales. It's gone to almost 11,000 today. Next year, it will be at 11,600, which is almost double of the 2017 number. The profit after tax has almost tripled in that period from 384 to 1,080, and the EPS has doubling from 6 to 12. But the point I want to stress is blue chips are quality. They are known to be quality, so their PV ratios will be high because the demand for those stocks are high. So we bought this stock at a 90 PE. For people who question about it, bought it at 90 PE. Today it is at 66, and next year's forward is at 46. So what is this telling you? It is telling you that what is the PE ratio? I showed you in one slide there. PE ratio is the expectation of future EPS. So when the PE ratio is coming down from that level, it's telling you that the company has consistently beaten the analyst estimate of their earnings, and hence that PE has come down. So the point is, if you buy a high PE company, you're going to buy something which is going to beat what people think about it. That's why it makes sense even at a high PE. So the blue chip fund is not going to run away from PE. Please understand. So the quality of the company is more important than the PE ratio of the company, because having bought it at a 90 PE, look at the returns. From the date we bought it, this index has moved 7.1% per annum. This stock has delivered 42% per annum. So I've made the case, I hope, in terms of identifying a blue chip, not worrying about the PE as long as we are confident about the future and the stock market respects that. The next company is slightly controversial. This is Bharti Airtel. Telecom was a challenging business, right? There were a lot of fights, and Jio has come pushing it away. So you're saying, why have you chosen as a blue chip? I'll tell you why. Because it's a dedicated telecom company. It also has the backing of a foreign partner in Singapore Telecom. But more importantly, in all of this maramari, the smaller companies have all vanished, and we are in a duopoly effectively. Yes, Vodafone is there somewhere in the background, but effectively it's a duopoly in probably the world's largest market and fastest growing market, which has got a huge boost because of the lockdown and the work from home and the need for data, right? So such a company, if you look at its financials, will go up and down, but you look at its operating margins, EBITDA margins, solid at 36 to 37. It went to 47. Next year will be a challenge because of the AGR and everything, but it's a solid margin. And so those PE ratios are irrelevant because it's a growing business. So such a stock, since we bought it in January 2017, the index has moved 7%. That stock has given us 18% per annum return. Right? So that's why we believe that it's a good company in a great sector, right? The next one, the last example is SBI Life Insurance, right? Strong SBI brand, 20,000 branch network, already the first among the private players with 23% market share. It's another LIC in the making, and such a company, look at its enterprise value, the substitute for sales. From 190, it is doubling to 400 next year. Look at its EPS, 11.5 to going to double to 23. And look at the PE ratio, the same story as the Tata. We bought it at a 75 PE. Today it's at 43. Next year is forward is at 37. Again, the same thing. The company has consistently beaten the analyst estimate of growth in EPS. So such a stock, which we bought in September 2017, the index has gone up 3.5% in that time per annum. This has tripled at 10% per annum. So I've shown you 3 cases of blue chips that we had bought and enjoyed, and they will be candidates for investment. Now also, I can't give a guarantee that they will be there, but yes, they are blue chips, right? So in that context, I showed you these as examples, but I wanted to tell you that the manager who's going to manage this fund, Mr. Rahul Baijal, has been with the company for 4 years. Next month, he'll complete 4 years. He's our primary large cap, because I wanted to talk to you about Sundaram's track record in large cap, because by and large, people look at us as a mid and small cap player, but over a period, we have been making a dedicated effort over the last 4 years, and his hiring was a key flexion point. We also moved equity desk to Bombay. So Rahul sits in Mumbai, as the rest of our team is in Chennai, with a conscious strategy to broaden our portfolio with large cap management. So Rahul leads that initiative. And so he manages 4 of our funds, which, as you can see from the first column, is heavily into large cap oriented funds. And Select Focus is another large cap fund that he already manages. And I want to showcase it to say that when he took it, it was the worst performing fund at 1-star ranking. Today, he's brought it to 5 stars. How has he done it? Right? What he has done in this time when he improved it, today, over 18 years of its existence, it has given 17% per annum as a large cap fund, and it's done better than its benchmark. And what I wanted to show you is that, yes, there is a question which will come up from y'all.
Can we wrap up in 5 minutes if it's okay? Because yeah. Thank you.
No, 5 minutes is all I need. So what I was trying to say was that, yes, large cap funds, the 35 large cap funds that I talked about since SEBI did the recategorization, had a mixed track record in beating the Nifty. There are all kinds of large cap funds in the industry. Focus has also had a mixed track record. But if you look at its comparison with its category average, as you can see, it has handsomely and consistently beaten the category average, right? And it's been in quartile 1 most of the time. It's been in top 10 ranks significant portion of the time, and it's stock picking. So there are these 8 stocks which in this fund have been held for at least 4 years and today are almost at least 3%. You can see how he's increased the weight and the kind of strong double-digit or high single-digit returns these stocks have generated in the market. So the long-term stock picking is a strength of his. But yes, I just wanted to answer a question saying, oh, you have a large cap fund already. What is this large cap? Select Focus is a concentrated large cap with only 30 stocks, whereas Blue Chip is a diversified large cap. So relative to that, it's got a concentrated index of Nifty 50. This has an index of Nifty 100. And within that, you know, he concentrates even more. So as I said, this is the 2 Nifties. But if you look at it, within 30 stocks, he has taken a very concentrated approach in this fund of 10 stocks being 60%, whereas in this fund, 10 stocks would be more diversified at 45%, right? The second is, even there, he's played 3 stocks to 26%. So he's a man with high conviction. I wanted to tell you that. And he follows this system of sector overlap is quite good with the benchmark, but the stock overlap is where he had flexibility in focus. But in this fund, he will have both closer to the benchmark in terms of stock and sector overlap. And he also manages a balanced fund, which has 75% large cap. The reason I pointed out this is that's a concentrated large cap. This is a diversified large cap. It has 48 stocks and top 10 is 45%. So even this fund, if you see, when he took it over, it was 1 star. Today it is 4 star. So he has demonstrated his large cap skills both in terms of a concentrated large cap and in terms of a diversified large cap, which has given double-digit returns since inception. And one more fund that he manages, which he launched 2 years ago, which has a multi-cap category but 60% large cap. The reason, and it's given 8% per annum versus only 1.5% of the index. What I wanted to stress is, in this period, when we are raising money, in a similar period 2 years back, we raised money. And if you see how we staggered the deployment over 6 months, why? Because there was a volatility. We expect the next 6 months to be volatile. One, because of those risk factors I already pointed out in terms of the COVID crisis and what's happening, but more importantly, because the US elections. So if you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elections, generally 3 months before the election, the markets have corrected. And then 3-6 months after, the US markets have recovered. So we expect that degree of volatility. Today's market, you would have seen, this period will be a volatile period, which works in favor of this fund, because as an NFO, whatever we collect, we will deploy it gradually whenever, because it's a blue chip portfolio. We know the stocks we want to buy. When there's a correction in those stocks, we will go in and grab them. So to that extent, this fund will be sector agnostic in that sense, because if you see sector performances have widely varied over the so many years. And over the last 3 years, we ourselves have changed our sector calls from overweight and underweight. And so this fund, to summarize, is going to be a diversified large cap with a 3-pronged blue chip framework, and it will have a blend of growth and value, right? With that, I've concluded my presentation. Thank you very much. I know I did take up a little more of your time, but thank you for your patience and listening to me. I hope I covered the whole gamut of whatever I promised at the start. So, Mr. Krishnan, thank you for giving me this opportunity, and Mr. Shamsuddin. So, I'm happy to take any questions if there are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sunil. I think you have kept us in real captivating. I was actually hesitating to interrupt you because I think for want of time, I think you have covered beautifully the whole idea in terms of the markets, the investor sentiments, and the possibility of the future and why India, the long-term growth story. There are questions on your mid-cap funds and large-cap funds. I think you have addressed all those questions to the great extent that I think we are the pitch that one needs to look at large-cap funds at this point of time. I think you have convincingly tried to reinforce that with all of us, and I think that that is well established with data and facts that you have given. There are very, very basic questions about why the allocation. I think more or less it's covered. The only question that probably that we would like to look at is that considering the inflation and the fiscal deficit that will happen in the next 1-2 years in the economy, do you think that these sort of growth trajectories or return trajectories will happen, or do you think that they will start moderating after some time?
So I think that first of all, I think the inflation fear is overdone, because I think that agriculture inflation will definitely be easing with the Kharif harvest coming through. So I think around about the time the RBI policy in January pre-budget will happen, I think this will ease in terms of with that, right? And I think the oil price outlook also is fairly stable. Even today I was seeing $45 is only the stability, and demand being low, I think inflation will not rise from a demand pull side. So I have a view that inflation is going to be at ease only. On the fiscal deficit front, I think that this budget is a crucial part in February, but I think the IMF and World Bank so far have indicated that they are very tolerant of the fiscal. The US has a 20% fiscal deficit. So I think that in the context of the world trying to recover, the tolerance of India's fiscal deficit going to a bit of a stretch is going to be higher. So the rating downgrade, which is the worry of the fiscal deficit, because fiscal deficit itself leading to inflation. The third thing is that I think that relative to the other countries, India will still be attractive. So any currency pressure, which also adds to the inflation bit, will also be at ease a little bit because of the flows. And I think if the government gets the Reforms Act together, then two things happen. The rating agencies are also more tolerant if the quality of your spending is around infrastructure rather than revenue like farm loan waiver or whatever. The second aspect is that FDI flow which comes in will be a huge source of capital. So from that point of view, the government itself through disinvestment will take that money and ease its balance sheet. So I'm a little bit more of an optimist on that fiscal front. And I think that with IMF predicting next year 6%, and if you take an inflation of 4.5%, you're talking about a nominal GDP of 10.5 for 2021-22. And if you look at it, 2 to 3% alpha over that for a large cap should not be a challenge. So I think that the nominal GDP of India will be relatively in a double-digit level. So I think I'm optimistic in that.
Thank you, Mr. Sunil, for your wonderful time and the wonderful session that you have given to us. I think I'm getting a lot of messages, and already some of the chat box people have mentioned that this is a very insightful and great presentation that you have given us. I do not want to delay. I hope you have finished your dinner before you start.
Yeah. I finished it, not to worry.
I will now request Mr. Shamsuddin, our director, to formally propose a vote of thanks. And I'm sure that with your presentation and the insights that we have received, I think we will be able to talk to our clients more effectively in the next few days to see how we can propel some more good subscriptions for these funds. Mr. Shamsuddin, please.
Sir, you are muted.
Mr. Shamsuddin, you have to unmute your...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Sunil Subramaniam, Managing Director of Sundaram Asset Management Company. As you started the story of Sumo Fighter, we all enjoyed, we are in front of the arena of fighters. And you have given a beautiful presentation. Maybe I can say one of the best in this time we had. And one of the longest presentation, but we never feel it. And you had given the insight of the Indian market and give full confidence to India. That is the most important. Each and everyone has trust and confidence in India to invest. And from the presentation, everyone will decide to invest the fund in the NFO. That is a satisfaction everyone has. On behalf of Burjeel Geojit Financial Service, as well as the more than 250 people of our guests attended here, I express our sincere thanks to you for the excellent presentation. If it was in a hall, I request all the audience to give a standing ovation to you. Such a beautiful presentation. I convey our sincere thanks to Mr. Ramesh Krishnamurthy and Mr. Karthik for arranging so wonderful and organizing this event. And once again, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shamsuddin.